And live. So recall we closed last time with that unfortunate account of the theme here at the end is in those days Israel had no king and everyone did as they saw fit, and Judges 19 was that account of the Levite and his concubine, and that story where they get into town and the guy says, you know, you shouldn't stay out here in the city square, why don't you come stay with me? And long story short, the men of the city come and they want to get to know them, yeah, which is Bible way of saying have sex with you. So very Sodom and Gomorrah-y sounding when you read it. And the Levite, the guy who owns the house says, here, take my virgin daughter. And then he kind of says, I changed my mind about that. But the Levite's quick to throw his concubine out and let them have their way with her, which they do to the point where they rape her to death. And she dies the next day. And Levite throws her over his horse, or I forget what kind of animal he was riding, but whatever, I don't know if it says. But then he cuts her up into 12 pieces, and he sends her pieces to the 12 tribes of Israel, basically as, what are we going to do about this? Because here's what these people have done. And today we get into the aftermath of that, where we're going to have, we could really say, a civil war between the tribes of Israel, and the one tribe, Benjamin, is where Gibeah, the town was where this lady got killed. Gibeah, the sin of the Gibeahites of the tribe of Benjamin. So the whole story is going to end, again, with the words, in those days Israel had no king and everyone did as they saw fit. And this is just another example of how bad things have gotten, where now we're even killing each other. So let's start out Judges 21 through 7. Judges 21 through 7. Someone want to do that for me, Susie? Thank you.
Then all the people of Israel came out, and the whole community from Dan to Beersheba, including the Israelites and Gilead, assembled as one man before the Lord at Mizpah. The pillars of the people from all the tribes of Israel took their places in the assembly of the people of God. 1,000-foot soldiers armed with swords. The people of Benjamin heard that the people of Israel had gone up to Mizpah. The people of Israel said, "Speak up, how did this evil happen?" Then the Levite, the husband of the woman who had been murdered, answered, "I, along with my concubine, came to Gibeah in Benjamin to spend the night. But the citizens of Gibeah rose up against me and surrounded the house during the night. They intended to kill me. They abused my concubine and she died. So I took hold of my concubine, cut her into pieces, and I sent her to every region of the inheritance of Israel, because the men of Gibeah did this outrageous, foolish deed in Israel. Look, all of you are descendants of Israel. Consider the matter and give up your judgment."
Okay, thank you. Number one, notice how the Levite relates the story of what happened to his own advantage. How does he get a little fast and loose with the truth when it comes to how he relates the story of what happened to cause this whole situation?
He puts the blame on the men that assaulted his concubine. He doesn't say he allowed her to go out there.
Right, yep. I have no responsibility in this. They came, they surrounded the house, they were after me, they raped my concubine as if they came in and forced themselves on her. Oh no, he was very quick to, here you go, take her. You know, he just completely is saying, this isn't my fault, what these horrible people did. When you read the actual account in chapter 19, you say, yeah, this guy wasn't that nice of a guy, this Levite. He has some responsibility in this too, but isn't that often the case when you're looking for justification to do what you want done, and we're quick to maybe hide our own sins in the process, as if, you know, this isn't my fault. So here's why I did what I did. I cut her into pieces because of these people and this lewd act they committed. Now, what are we going to do about it? Speak up. Give your verdict. Well, what's the verdict? Let's do, where's a good place to pause? 8 through 16. 8 through 16. Someone got that? Lisa's got that? Okay.
All the people then rose up as one man. They said, "Not one of us will go out to his tent, nor will any of us return to their homes. Now this is what we will do to Gibeah. We will determine who goes against it by choosing lots. We will choose 10 men out of every 100 from all the tribes of Israel, and 100 out of 1,000, and 1,000 out of 10,000, to gather provisions for the troops. When the men of Israel arrive at Gibeah in Benjamin, Israel can do to the men of Gibeah what they deserve for all the disgraceful things they did in Israel." So all the men of Israel were gathered against the city. The various groups were united as if they were one man. The tribes of Israel sent men through the whole tribe of Benjamin, saying, "What is this evil thing that has been done among you? Now hand over the men, these worthless, wicked men of Gibeah, from Gibeah. We will put them to death, and out of this evil from Israel." But the people of Benjamin were not willing to listen to the voice of their brothers, the people of Israel. Instead, the people from all the cities of Benjamin gathered at Gibeah to go out for war against the people of Israel. On that day, the people of Benjamin mustered from their cities 26,000 men armed with swords, not counting those who lived in Gibeah, from which they mustered an additional 700 elite men. From all these troops, there were 700 elite soldiers who were left-handed, each of whom could sling a stone at a single hair and not miss.
Yeah. So, and if you look at 17, there's going to be 400,000 swordsmen on the other side here, Israel apart from Benjamin. So the odds are definitely stacked in one, which makes sense, 11 tribes against one, or 10 tribes against one. 11. Where does Benjamin drop the ball here? So the Israelites come and say, "Give us the men," and Benjamin's answer is,
Won't do it.
"We won't." Yeah, a little bit of maybe ancestral pride, a little bit of we defend our own. Who are you to come here and tell us that, one would think after hearing such a grotesque act, they'd be more than willing to say, considering the law of Moses, yeah, these people should be put to death for such a horrible thing. That's the right punishment for this crime. And yet they refuse to give up these men. In fact, they take up arms and they're going to defend them. And in fact, the people of Gibeah, who very well could be some of the men who are responsible, they're going to fight right alongside us against our fellow Israelites. So you see how this is just turning into a huge, huge mess. And again, the point of all this is, in those days, Israel had no king, and everyone did as they saw fit. And this whole story in 19 through 21 shows just how bad things have gotten in Israel. And now they're going to start killing each other over something that perhaps we say could have been avoided. Let's just keep going, and then we'll talk about number 2, 17 through 25. John's got that.
Meanwhile, the men of Israel, apart from Benjamin, mustered 400,000 men armed with swords, each of them a trained soldier. They arose and went up to Bethel, and the people of Israel inquired of God, "Who will go up to lead us into the battle against the Benjaminites?" The Lord said, "Judah will take the lead in the battle." The Israelites got up in the morning and set up camp against Gibeah. The men of Israel went out for war against Benjamin and lined up for battle at Gibeah. But the Benjaminites came out from Gibeah, and that day they struck down to the ground 22,000 men of Israel. The men of Israel renewed their courage and again lined up for battle in the same spot they had lined up on the first day. The people of Israel went up and wept before the Lord until evening. They inquired of the Lord, shall we go out again to engage in battle with the people of Benjamin, our brothers? Again the Lord said, "Go up against them." The Israelites approached the Benjaminites on the second day. Benjamin came out from Gibeah to confront them on the second day and took down an additional 18,000 men from among the Israelites right to the ground. All of them men armed with swords.
Yeah, so things aren't exactly going the Israelites' way here at the beginning of this. Benjamites are holding their own and then some. We're going to talk in a minute here about how much of this is divine intervention. Some of it, though, even physically, Gibeah is kind of on a hill. It's definitely on a higher place elevation-wise, and you have an advantage if you've got the higher ground, certainly as people are coming up to fight against you. So that could be part of it too. But it seems like God is trying to teach the Israelites a lesson, and we're going to contrast this with what happened back in Joshua, when a very similar account happened with the city of Ai, that the Israelites should have won, but the first couple times things didn't go their way, and God was trying to teach them a spiritual lesson. So we'll turn to that in a second. Let's go 26 through 31. 26 through 31, Jim?
After that, all the Israelites, the entire army, went to Bethel. There they wept and sat before the Lord and fasted all that day until evening. They offered burnt offerings and fellowship offerings before the Lord. The people of Israel inquired of the Lord. The Ark of the Covenant of God was there in those days. Phinehas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron, was ministering in front of the ark in those days. He asked, "How shall I go out to battle against our brothers, the Benjaminites, or shall I stop?" The Lord said, "Go up, because tomorrow I will give them into your hand." Then Israel positioned men in ambushes all around Gilead. The men of Israel went up against the men of Benjamin on the third day, and they lined up against Gilead. How do you say that?
Gibeah?
Gibeah, thank you, as they had done before. Again, the Benjaminites went out to confront the people of Israel. The Benjaminites were drawn away from the city, and they began to strike down some of the people. Slow page turner. Killing them in open country as they had done before along the highway that goes to Bethel and the one to Gibeah. They killed about 30 men of Israel.
So what's happening here, battle-wise?
Killing less Israelites. It's turning.
Things are starting to
The
turn.
tide is starting to turn, yeah. Well, it starts out, okay, they begin to inflict casualties, but keep going, Jim, you're doing just fine.
How far?
32 through 39.
Okay. The Benjaminites thought they were being struck down before us, just as they were before. But the Israelites has said, "We will retreat and draw them out of the city to the highways." So all the men of Israel fell back from their positions and drew up a battle line at Baal-Tamar. Then the Israelites, who were hiding in ambush, came bursting out from their positions west of Gibeah. 10,000 specially chosen men from all Israel came out against Gibeah. The battle was fierce, and the Benjaminites did not realize that calamity was about to fall upon them. The Lord struck down Benjamin before Israel, and the Israelites brought Benjamin to ruin on that day. 25,100 men who were armed with swords fell. Then the Benjaminites saw that they were beaten. The men of Israel had given ground to Benjamin because they were relying on the men in the ambushes that they had set up near Gibeah. The hidden attackers struck quickly. They dashed into Gibeah, spread out, and struck the entire city with the edge of the sword. This was a signal for the men of Israel and for those in the ambush. When they saw a great cloud of smoke coming up from the city, the men of Israel were to turn back to join the battle.
Okay, so what was Israel's strategy here to finally defeat the Benjamites?
Pull them away from the city.
Yeah. So what can you do then to
Kind
the
of
city?
divided them up.
Yeah.
Take the city.
Yeah, all the fighting men go out and pull them away as far as we can, and once they get far enough, we'll just go in and burn the city and take down the women and the children and loot it and burn the thing to the ground. So keep that in mind. Keep your finger there and turn to Joshua, chapter 7 and 8.
Joshua what?
Joshua 7 and 8. And we're certainly not going to read this whole thing, but so remember the Israelites, they crossed the Jordan. Jericho was the first big city, the walls of Jericho, that whole story that they overtook with the walls come tumbling down. And then Ai was the next city. However, what happened here is this guy named Achan. Remember, God said, when you take the city, everything you take is to be devoted to me. Don't take anything for yourself. Put it into the temple treasury. You're not in this to gain prosperity. Everything that you plunder comes to me. Well, Achan decided to take some things into his own hands and say, no, I'm gonna take some of this for myself. So, the Israelites, if you look at verse, how about 3 through 5 of chapter 7, sorry. 7, 3 through 5. So you got that, Jan?
They returned to Joshua and told him, all the people do not need to go up. Let about 2,000 or 3,000 men go up and they can defeat Ai. Do not trouble all the people with going up there because there are only a few people in Ai. So about 3,000 men from among the people went up there, but they fled from the men of Ai. The men of Ai struck dead about 36 of them. They pursued them from the city gate as far as Shebarim, and they struck them dead on the way down the descent. So the hearts of the people melted and turned to water.
So this is supposed to be an easy victory, and it ends up being just the opposite, and all of a sudden the people are like, what happened? We were supposed to, after, especially what just happened in Jericho, we hammered them, it was easy, and now we get to this little podunk town, and they're not going down. What's the deal? And Joshua figures it out right away. Joshua tore his clothes, fell face down before the ark. Elders of Israel did the same. Why, sovereign Lord, did you bring this people across the Jordan to deliver us from the hands of the Amorites? O Lord, what can I say now that Israel's been routed by its enemy? The Canaanites will hear about this. They'll surround us. They'll wipe out our name from the earth. And read 10 through 12 to get God's response. Why did this just happen in Ai? You want to do it, Jim?
I can do it. Then the Lord gave directions to Joshua. You, get up. Why are you falling on your face? Israel has sinned. They have transgressed the covenant that I commanded for them. Yes, they have even taken some of the devoted things. They have stolen, they have deceived. Yes, they have even placed the devoted things that they stole among their own goods. That is why the people of Israel are not able to stand before their enemies. They turned their backs before their enemies because they have become liable to destruction. I will not continue to be with you unless you destroy the devoted things from among you.
So God's point is what? Here's why you just lost.
Because you didn't listen.
You didn't listen to me. I'm trying to teach you a spiritual lesson here. Jericho, you can see what I can do. You didn't do anything in Jericho. You literally just marched around the city and the walls came down when you blew the trumpet. Here's the other side of that. If you don't listen, here's how badly it can go and how quickly it can go badly. There's no way you should have lost to these people, but you did. And here's why. God has a bigger plan here. So now, skip ahead to chapter 8. And here's where we're going to get some similarity to what we're reading in Judges. Start at verse 10, maybe 10 through 17. Ready? You want to do that?
Joshua got up early in the morning and he mustered the people. Then he went up and he and the elders of Israel, leading the main force of the people to Elah. The whole military force that was with him went up in advance. Joshua and he had taken about 5,000 men and set them in an ambush between Bethel and Ai on the west side of the city. This is how they positioned the people. The whole army that had come from the camp was north of the city, but the detachment in the ambush was west of the city. That night Joshua went out into the middle of the valley. Till when, you said?
17.
When the king of Ai saw this, the men of the city got up quickly and went out to face Israel in battle. The king and all the people at the chosen place facing the Arba, but he did not know that there was an ambush for him in the west of the city. Then Joshua and all Israel pretended to be beaten before them and fled into the wilderness. All the people that were in the city were marshaled to pursue them. As they pursued Joshua, they were lured from the city. So not a man was left in Ai or Bethel who did not go out after Israel. They left the city open and pursued Israel.
Yeah, and then if you just skip ahead, we can just kind of look at it. 20, what happened? The men of Ai looked back, saw the smoke of the city, because same story, right? The men all went to pursue, and okay, they went in, and no one's left to defend the city, so they went in and burned the thing down, and The men looked, saw the smoke rising against the sky, but now they had no chance to escape in any direction. So the ambush was successful, and the Israelites ended up taking down the city of Ai. Sounds familiar. Sounds very familiar to what's happening here in the book of Judges, and that's the point made in number 2. Back to Judges. Why, after the Lord had directed Israel to go up against Benjamin, did they, you think, lose the first 2 battles and suffer so many casualties? And compare this account with what we just read. And there might be a couple answers here.
I want to remind them how powerful he is.
Okay. Yeah, it's
Battles
got.
won or lost on his say so.
Yeah, yeah. What spiritual lesson maybe is God trying to teach the Israelites in their pursuit of Benjamin? And their
Listen to me. It's not your doing, it's my doing.
So here's where we can kind of start to, you might have some, not disagreement, but is he trying to maybe teach them, what are we doing here? You know, you're fighting against your own brothers. You were so rash to this decision. You were that quickly willing to muster everyone together and just destroy one of these tribes. Is that maybe one of the things? The second thing that some have said, when you go back and look at Joshua or Judges 20, they lose once, they lose twice, and then in verse 26, then they went up and they sat weeping before the Lord, and they fasted, and they presented burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, and they inquired of the Lord at the ark. You see what they have humbled themselves, right? They have finally, it's not about us and our power. Lord, are we doing the right thing here? We can't do anything without your help. They've gotten over themselves and realize it's only with the help of the Lord that any battle is successful. We're not that far removed from the story of Joshua and the people of Ai. And perhaps this what was happening triggered a reminder for the whole story of Achan and his sin. Perhaps God is trying to teach us a lesson here too. And the tide turned after that, right? After that account where they humbled themselves, and then they used the exact same strategy that they did back in the book of Joshua, and the Israelite army, sans Benjamin, is successful against the city of Gibeah and the tribe of Benjamin. This is not something to be proud of if you're an Israelite. I don't know how many people living during the Civil War were proud of what happened in our country, that we have literally brothers killing brothers and cousins killing cousins, and you can argue about the cause they were fighting for, but could this have been avoided? Perhaps some would ask. Could there be a diplomatic way to solve this instead of getting out guns and swords? Not so here in Gibeah. Any other thoughts on that? Let's finish it to the end of the chapter. So we're starting at 39b, the paragraph the Benjaminites had begun to inflict. It's kind of telling the same story, just from a little different perspective. So I want to finish it up there.
I will.
Lisa, thanks. To the end of the chapter.
Benjamin had begun to strike some of the men of Israel dead, about 30 men. So they said, "Look, they are being struck down before us, as they were in the first battle." But as a column of smoke began to rise above the city, the Benjaminites turned to look behind them, and suddenly they saw that the city was going up toward heaven like a burnt offering. Then the Israelites turned back, and the Benjaminites were horrified because they realized that disaster was falling upon them. They fled from the men of Israel to escape toward the wilderness, but the battle kept up with them, as Israelites from the cities all around them were striking them down. The Israelites encircled Benjamin, pursued them, and overran their positions all the way to Noah, a spot east of Gibeah. From Benjamin 18,000 fell, all of them strong warriors. The surviving Benjaminites turned and fled toward the wilderness, to the rock of Rimmon. About 5,000 of these men were picked off along the highways. The Israelites caught up with them at Gidom and struck down 2,000 more of their men. So the total of Benjaminites that fell that day was 25,000 men, armed with swords, all of them powerful warriors. But the surviving 600 men turned and fled toward the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon. And they stayed at the rock of Rimmon for 4 months. The men of Israel had turned back against the Benjaminites and struck them with the edge of the sword. They struck the entire city, including the animals and whatever else could be found. They burned down all the rest of the cities.
Yeah, this is pretty bad. I mean, Benjamin is down to 600 guys. Kids are gone, the women are gone, the animals are gone, the cities are set on fire. It's almost extinction. We're getting pretty close to extinction for the tribe of Benjamin. Number 4 there on your sheets, we talked about 3. Why do you think the Benjamites defended the men who committed such obvious crimes? What lesson is there for us in this? This all could have been avoided if they would just would have handed over the guys who... that was the original request, right? Bring out these men who did this horrible thing. Okay, bring them out. And they refused. No, we're not going to do that. We'd rather fight. Okay, well, now they're down to 600 people. Perhaps in hindsight, but what,
Did they not think it was so horrible?
maybe, which is a problem, if they didn't think
Stubbornness.
it was so bad. Stubbornness. Yeah, how much had that attitude infiltrated the entire tribe? It's not a big deal. Maybe a little bit of that, maybe, who are you to come and tell us what we should do? We're an independent people.
Yeah,
We're
right.
Benjamites. We don't have to listen to anybody.
Kind of compare that to today. So if a foreign country came to the US government and said, we want such and so,
Sure.
this group of people, whatever, because they did this.
Right.
I don't know, if it was an adversary of the United States, we wouldn't just hand those people over.
Yep.
We would say, well, we'll try them here,
Right.
perhaps.
Right.
So is that kind of the mentality in Benjamin?
Yeah,
They
but
would try
We'll
them.
take care of it ourselves. We'll take care of our own. How dare you come in and tell us how to run things? I could see that too, yeah. And then this is where it's kind of, we can't quite equate this today because we don't have, these people are all like related, they're all cousins. So it's not like it's the Canadians coming and telling us how to do our thing or an enemy coming us. This is like this is Wisconsin telling Minnesota. Maybe that'd be a little closer, but even then you're kind of related, but you're not. We're states that are united, but each state has their own. Israel's just kind of a special animal when it comes to some of this.
About Israel's bluffing.
We're gonna call your bluff? We'll see.
You're not gonna wipe us out just for this.
Because we're blood brothers, yeah.
Right.
You would never do such a thing to us. So, yeah, we'll call your bluff. Let's see if you're willing to fight. And I can't stress enough, again, the reason this is in there, you say, why is 2 chapters spent on this? Go to the last verse of the book. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as he saw fit. This is just another example of, look at how bad things have gotten. We're now, the tribe of Benjamin's almost gone.
Like the Wild West before they got
Kind
shirts
of like
out
the
there.
whole Wild West. Yeah, everyone's just doing
No
their
law,
own.
everybody did what they wanted to do.
No law and order, nobody cares, everyone makes their own rules. And we talked about number 5, how when the people finally humbled themselves, that's when the tide of the battle turned in the Israelites' direction. So there's no one innocent here, right? The Benjamites have their problems, the Israelites have their issues. There's just a whole bunch of sin happening, and look at the destruction that's been caused because of it. And I just think about, as the Israelites come in and the men of the city are gone, and here's all these women and children and animals, and they're just being slaughtered. What do you think is going through their heads? What's going through the head of the 8-year-old kid who, he has no idea what's happening or why this is happening, and now mom's watching her kid get run through with a sword and she's next, and you just gotta think, look at what happens when you get away from the Lord. I pray that those people are all in heaven, that's a different story, but just absolute, it's become chaos. When God is not our focus, horrible, it's a horrible story, it really is. You thought the cutting the lady in 12 parts was bad. It just keeps getting worse here, it seems. So now we have a problem, because there's only 600 men left. There's gonna be a difficult time
All the women-
repopulating.
Yeah, all the women and children are dead.
Yeah.
So they have to marry outside their realm,
Right.
so to speak.
Right, so that's what chapter 21 is all about. where the Israelites all of a sudden kind of have a twinge of their conscience and say, I wonder if we went too far with this. So, let's read 21, 1 through 9. Ken's got that, thank you.
Previously, the men of Israel had taken an oath at Mizpah. Not a man from among us will give his daughter to a Benjaminite as his wife. The people came to Bethel and remained there before God until evening. They lifted up their voices and wept bitterly. They said, "Why, Lord God of Israel, has this happened in Israel, that today one tribe has been removed from Israel?" The next day, when the people rose early, they built an altar there and offered burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. Then the Israelites said, "From all the tribes of Israel, was there anyone who did not come up to the assembly of Israel before the Lord?" For they had taken this solemn oath against anyone who did not come up to the Lord at Mizpah. He will certainly be put to death.
Just to intervene, Mizpah is where they made the oath that we're going to fight against the Benjamites. Let's all assemble together to fight against the Benjamites. So someone didn't come. And who is that? Okay, keep going.
Then the people of Israel felt compassion toward Benjamin, their brother, and they said, "One tribe of Israel is cut off today. What can be done to provide wives for those who remain? We have sworn by the Lord not to give any of our daughters to them as wives." So then they asked, "Was there anyone from the tribes of Israel who did not go up to the Lord of Mizpah?" They found that no one from Jabesh Gilead had come to the assembly at the camp. In fact, when the roll call had been taken, not a man was there from the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead. So the assembly sent 12,000 powerful warriors and commanded them, "Go and strike down the people who live at Jabesh Gilead with the edge of the sword, including the women and children. This is what you are to do. Every male and every woman who has known the bed of a male you shall devote to destruction." They found among the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead 400 young women who were virgins, who had never known a man by lying down with a male. They brought the 400 women to the camp at Shiloh in the land of Canaan.
Okay, we'll pause there for a second. Yeah, messy. Number one, first of all, on the top there, Israel had intended to completely annihilate the tribe of Benjamin. They made an oath not to give any of their daughters in marriage to the Benjamites. Remember, God takes oaths seriously, so we can't go back on that. So that's a problem. And now they feel bad about it. The chapter records an incredible change of heart. Why were the Israelites suddenly so downcast after finally winning the victory? Don't think too hard.
I just feel bad now that there won't be any more Benjaminites.
This is, it's, the heat of the moment, right? Maybe we were so intent on doing this, and now you look back and you see they're almost extinct, and maybe you remember some of the stories told about little Benjamin and the sack in the cup, or the cup in the sack, and how much Dad loved Benjamin, and now here we are. We almost killed all of his ancestors, or all of his descendants. There's a definite. We maybe went a little too far with this. We screwed up. Oops, yeah. These are our brothers, and we let our emotions get the best of us. You definitely see that they are repentant, they're weeping, and they go to God. So now what should we do? The whole thing about Jabesh Gilead, so that's in Manasseh. That's over on the east side of the Jordan River. These are from the tribe of Manasseh, these people. When you're there too, you might think this is kind of a rough judgment on them. So basically what Ken read was, at Mizpah, everyone's supposed to come and gather, and we're going to unite and fight against the Benjamites. And the people in Manasseh and Jabesh Gilead said, "Nah, we're not interested in that. We're not going to go." And that wasn't an option. They had made a covenant with each other. The people of Israel, we are united. You don't get to decide for yourself what battles you want to fight and what you don't. And God calls it out. These people didn't come, so what's the consequence for them?
Now their women have to be with Benjaminites.
Every male and every woman who's not a virgin were cut down in Jabesh Gilead. Too rough? Is God being too, is this a God people look at and say, what a nasty God, that's horrible. This happens a lot in the Old Testament, right? You read stories like this, say, what a horrible God who would do such an awful thing. It's rough, it's brutal, I'm not gonna apologize for that, it definitely is. Yeah, it's, however, what do we have to remember here?
God takes sin pretty serious.
If they just would have come, when they were called to come at Mizpah and assemble, then none of this would have happened. However, they did. They chose to go their own way. They said, we're not interested. God takes sin seriously. There are consequences for sin. Again, like I said earlier with the Benjamites and the women and children of the town, I pray these people are all in heaven. But there are consequences for sin. And sometimes someone's sin affects other people. The consequences for you is the effects it has on you because of them. And that's definitely one of the issues here, where now the whole place gets ransacked and destroyed. And all that's left are 400 young women, virgin women, who've never slept with a man. God's plan is going to be carried out at the end of the day. But sometimes to get there, especially when sin's involved, and you see this throughout the Old Testament, don't you? I, the Lord, am a jealous God. You will not have any gods before me. Certainly not yourself. You don't get to choose what you want to do. He takes these covenants seriously.
So Pastor, I don't know if I missed something, or you're saying God is telling them to do this?
Yes,
So
yeah.
is that from verse 2, that they went up to Bethel and remained there?
And
before
inquired of the
God?
Lord, yeah.
Okay, so even though it says, the Israelites said, we're gonna go do this, it's direction from God.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
I hadn't gotten that in the first reading.
Yeah, I think you can, well, yeah, well, we don't have I don't see here the consequences that you see in the last chapter where, to me, if this was something God had told them not to do, there would be immediate consequences for such a horrific act. And you don't see that here.
Okay.
So it tells me that when they inquired of the Lord, this was the answer the Lord gave them. Who wasn't here? Jabesh Gilead wasn't here. Okay, go take care of business. So now, you have these 400 virgins, and you'd think, okay, we have 600 guys, maybe we can just, how do I put this? This becomes a mess too. Let's just read it. This becomes another just black mark. 13 through, just go 13 to the end of the book. All right, thank you.
And the entire assembly sent a message to the Benjaminites who were at the rock of Rimmon. They extended an offer of peace to them. The Benjaminites then returned, and the Israelites gave them the women that they had kept alive from Jabesh Gilead. But they did not find enough wives for all of them. Once more the people had compassion on Benjamin, because the Lord had left an empty spot among the tribes of the Lord. So the elders of the assembly asked, what shall we do to get wives for those who are spared, since the women from Benjamin have been wiped out? They said there must be a way to provide an inheritance for the surviving remnant of Benjamin, so that the tribe will not be blotted out from Israel. But we cannot give them wives from our daughters, because the people of Israel have sworn, cursed is anyone who gives a woman to Benjamin. But then someone said, look, there is an annual festival of the Lord in Shiloh, which is north of Bethel, east of the highway that goes from Bethel towards Shechem, and south of Lebonah. So they commanded the Benjaminites, go and lie and wait in the vineyards and watch. And when the daughters of Shiloh come out to join the dances, come out from the vineyards, and each man should seize a wife for himself from the daughters of Shiloh. Then return to the land of Benjamin. If it happens that their fathers or brothers come to us to complain, we will say to them, be gracious to them, because we failed to capture a woman for each man during the battle, and you did not break your oath that you would not give your daughters, so you will not incur guilt. So that is what the Benjaminites did. They grabbed and carried off as many women as they needed from among the dancers, and they went and returned to their family property, rebuilt their cities, and lived in them. At the same time, the Israelites returned from there. Each man returned to the territory of his tribe and clan, each man to his own family property. In those days, there was no king in Israel, and every man did whatever was right in his own eyes.
Yeah. So imagine you're watching the movie and this is the end of the movie, right? The story of Judges and the last 10 minutes of this movie is like, is there going to be a happy ending here? And what's the ending of the story? So we take the 400 virgins and give them to 400 of the 600 guys. Well, there's still 200 guys who don't have women. What are we going to do for them? And what did they decide?
We'll steal them from amongst the
Steal them.
dancers.
Yeah, let's steal from the dancers from Shiloh. And that way, you know, if you steal them, you're not breaking the oath.
Technicality.
Technically, you didn't give them, because you said you wouldn't give them willfully, so we'll steal them. And that way you can keep your end of the oath. And the end. Everyone goes home, the end.
Boom, and they lived happily ever
Yeah, exactly. And the last picture is them raking up all the carnage from everything that's been burned down and starting to rebuild, and yeah, to be continued, I guess, maybe would be how it ends. And you're just like, that was kind of dark, but that's the point of the book. This is just a
Picturing
dark.
women over guys' shoulders, you know? like
Yeah,
carrying
exactly.
'em.
Just carrying them off. I'll take this one and you
Caveman
take
days.
that one. What?
Back to the caveman.
Back to the caveman days, yeah. And again, I think this last verse is the perfect way to end the book. This is what happens. This is what happens when the Lord's not in charge. This is meant to be dark, to show you just the effects of doing things our own way instead of God's way. So,
Today, people accuse Christians of being misogynistic. And if they don't know the whole story, if you just read it on face value and say, these are the people of God.
yeah, you can see why people make that accusation, yeah. Yeah, there's plenty of sections in the Old Testament where if you don't know the context and kind of the bigger picture, like, that's not a God I want to worship, that allows something like that. All of this was avoidable. All of this was avoidable.
It's a God you don't want to make mad, though.
And it's definitely, this is the side of him where, yeah.
I know Karen used to hate it when I picked her up and threw her over my shoulder. It was like, time for us to go home, honey.
Yes.
Let's go.
How did she like it when you stole her at the very beginning? Yeah.
Well, her boyfriend didn't like it.
Yeah. I'd say, hey, you're not breaking your oath, I'm just taking her.
Is she here? Are they watching this?
All right, we kind of talked about 2, we talked about 3, you know, this last chapter just continues to underline that truth. Number 4, right, maybe the greatest miracle in all this is grace that God shows Benjamin and Israel. No one's innocent in this whole story. The Benjamites have their issues, Israelites certain, the rest of the tribes have their issues. Sin is just happening left and right. And yet at the end of the day, God's gracious to the Israelites. They all get to go home. The Benjamites get wives. They get to rebuild and start their tribe up again. And again, you know, all this goes back to, I don't know how many people there were, 10, 20, 30, 50. Bring those guys out so we can bring that guy out so we can have sex with him. That is where this all started. And it snowballs into what is at the end of chapter 21, how many thousands of people have lost their lives. Women, children, how many cities destroyed. None of this had to work this. Now God used it all. He had a purpose for it all. If nothing else, for us to read and say, this is what happens. But man, there is no sin that occurs where, well, it's just a little sin. There are always consequences. And God will get to the spiritual heart of it one way or the other.
You know, Pastor, I'm not saying we're any different than the Israelites.
And that's kind of number 5 here. Yeah, go ahead.
But back when Moses went up in the mountain and they built that idol, and I mean, it seems like, I don't know what period of time this all happened through, but it seems like the memories are extremely short in those days.
Yeah.
You know, you'd think after something happened, like the earth opened up and swallowed up how many thousands or hundreds or whatever it was,
Right.
that they'd remember that for at least a few generations.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, we've had that a few times in the book of Joshua or Judges, when it says they didn't remember the Lord. Was it that they literally didn't remember, or was it that they just didn't care?
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think they forgot.
No,
Just-
I don't
We're just
either.
gonna do our own thing.
I just think things passing, I mean, even these days, how quickly extraordinary events pass into legend.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it probably didn't really happen that way. That's grandpa embellishing it a little bit, you know, or something like
Sure.
that.
Yeah, we're 200 years removed from Moses and those stories, and don't you remember what happened in Egypt? Like, yeah, you know, maybe. Or was that even true? Doesn't matter. It doesn't affect us anymore. We're living in the 1100s. We're not living in those days.
Look at our
Times are
country, how it
different.
was founded, and what those people went through back then to develop this country.
Yeah,
And that's only been a short 200 and some years ago.
right.
So I guess we're in the same boat, you know?
Same thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Times have changed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's true. It's true. So it makes sense. I mean, it's not right, but it makes sense when they don't remember the Lord. Yeah. We're in a different age now. Happens all the time.
That's old fashioned.
That's old fashioned. Yeah, that's not the way it works anymore.
But don't we see that in our world today?
Exactly.
too?
Yeah.
You know, we read this and we think, oh, the sin that they did, it was horrible. But the sin that we do and that our world does is horrible today too.
Yep.
But the takeaway from that is God's forgiveness
Right.
and his patience with them.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. So
is
just as much as here's how
great comfort.
right, just as much as here's how bad it is that everyone does their own thing. On the other side of it, without being expressly stated, look at how merciful God is. That even through all this, He lets them continue. He doesn't wipe them out. He doesn't start all over. Because no, this is the people through whom the Savior's going to come. He made a promise. He can't go back on that promise. So,
Reserve, there are still 7,000 in Israel who have not left.
good. Well, okay. That brings us to the end of Judges. I know it's not the most grace-filled book out there, but I think we learned a few things about some things. So hopefully it was worth your time. We will take next week, and no study next week, and then start up Samuel, 1 Samuel. Ruth would be chronologically what's next. It falls in this time period, but we'll just kind of keep on the narrative of the history here, the children of Israel. So get into the books of Samuel. All right. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the book of Judges. Certainly as we read that book, it was a dark time in the history of your people. We see lessons on what happens when everyone does as they see fit and does not have you as their ultimate king. And still today, we can confess times we have had that attitude, where when it comes to certain sins in our life, maybe forgiveness, as we talked about this morning, we don't recognize your kingship, and we decide to do as we see fit. Thank you for your mercy. Thank you for continuing to forgive us for the times we have gone our own way. Thank you for the cross of your Son and the motivation that gives to tell us we are saints, forgiven in his blood, and that makes us want to live as he has lived and love as he has loved and be an example of what it means to be a Christian. And for our purposes today, what greater way than to say, I forgive you, to someone who's wronged us. Bless us to that end, and thank you for the lessons we've learned from the book of Judges. In Jesus' name, amen.